Happy Sunday, everybody. My name is Jenna, and I'd like to welcome you to Shift. If this is your first time here, you can scan this QR code, fill out the Connect card, and we'll give you a Starbucks gift card this week because you deserve it, and things are crazy out there. So you'll also see a bunch of other stuff on our digital page, like how to give, how to get plugged in, and upcoming events. Speaking of, on the 20th, our combined youth group Refuge is headed to the beach. We're meeting at First Christian and leaving at 8:30 in the morning. It's $5 per person and we'll be home by 4:30. All the info is on the digital page and you can also register from there too. Then on the 31st, we'll have our very first serve day. We'll meet at the YMCA from 10 a.m. to noon. You can stay the whole morning or sign up for time slots on time slots. You can stay the whole morning or sign up for time slots on the digital page. You can scan this QR code or the one by the welcome table. And we'll be putting together care packages for the Y to distribute to Gainesville's underprivileged. It's gonna be amazing. That's all the announcements that I have for today, so let's jump into week 2 of A Better Way. That rhymed.
So, this past week I got to thinking, it was one of those weeks where it was just like super busy and there was a lot of stuff happening and I started thinking about a song came on is what happened, and it's by this German band that I really like, and they're called Volbeat, and they were singing this song, and in the song it just reminded me, like if you ever have a song that you really love, does it like take you back to a moment in time where you heard that song? Okay, so Volbeat does that for me, but the time that it takes me back to is like January, February of 2020, because that's when I first heard them. I found them on Amazon Music, and it was a station and started playing it. I'm like, ooh, who's this? So I started listening to it, and so then I started streaming all of their music, and it was right when the shutdown happened, was when I was really listening to their music, and there's a few songs that really take me back to that. And as that song played, I remember, now, I don't want to downplay the pain that COVID caused people. I got it. It was horrible, all the things. But for our family, for that moment, those first few months, right, it took me back there where we just got to be. We just got to be together. My daughter at the time was a senior in high school, and she was working and doing all the school things. And so, she'd go to school, and then she'd have some sort of rehearsal or practice, and then she had work, and so we didn't get to see her a ton like we used to. And then all of a sudden, everything just kind of stopped, and we got to have family dinners together. And we did puzzles, and we did family game nights, and we had family movie nights. And her 18th birthday was during the whole shutdown, and we got one of those big yard signs, and then we had a parade, and some of you guys were part of that parade for her, and ran a 5K, virtual 5K with her on her birthday, and we went to the beach all the time because it was one of the few places that you could do stuff, and so we went to the beach all the time, and it just took me back to that moment in time where, yes, there was always that underlying current of oh Lord, what's going to happen next, but also just we stopped, right? And like we all swore, do you remember? We all swore that we would never go back to normal. Do you remember that? Do you remember how we said we would never go back to the way things were? Like it was just too crazy. And when we stepped out of it, we realized just how crazy stuff was. And life is like that, though. Like it's a couple years later, and then you kind of look around, and things are kind of just like, I don't know about you, I won't put this on you, but personally, just kind of right back to where it was, right? And life, little by little, just starts getting busier and busier and busier, and before you know it, you look around and nothing's really changed. At times, I don't know about you, but things can get overwhelming. It feels like everything's on fire, right? And so it can be overwhelming. It feels like you just have this constant bombardment and just feeling anxious, and it feels like sometimes that there are not enough hours in the day to do all of the things that I want to do, and then because of that, I feel like I'm constantly rushing. And what happens is that I don't have time for the things that I actually love. And then it feels like I don't have time for the people that I love, right? And then I start feeling like a bad husband or a bad father or a bad friend, which then heaps on the anxiety and and it's just like this cycle, right? And then all of a sudden, a song comes on and reminds me, do you remember, Joe, just a few short years ago, you promised you would never get back into just that rut that you said you'd never go back into. Oh, and look, and here we are. So what if one of the things that COVID exposed, just that whole time period, what if one of the things that it exposed was the fact that life isn't supposed to be that way? That we're not supposed to live life at this frenetic, hectic pace. And what if I told you that the greatest enemy to the life that you want may be the way that you're living the life you have? Let me say that again. Can you go ahead and show that? The greatest enemy to the life that you want may be the way that you're living the life that you have. And I'll be very honest that for me personally, that this is a difficult topic to teach through, because this is something that I struggle in. My personality is I get up early in the morning and I hit the ground running. I have my cup of coffee and I check my emails and then I'm going. Like this morning, I was up at 4:30. I didn't mean to. My wife was looking at me. I only laid there for a few minutes before I got out of bed because I didn't want to wake her up, keep her up. But I was out of bed by like 5 a.m. and I was doing stuff, and I haven't stopped since. But that's my personality. It's just go. I got to be doing something. Now, I will say, when it's time to turn off, I have zero issue turning everything off and checking out. But it's not till like 7 at night, all right? That's when it is, and I'm done. But I do like during the day, despise slow. I don't enjoy just, yeah. So some of you guys feel that with me. But if I think through my day, right, it's pretty typical. You know, I've got my job, and then I've got people, and I've got tasks that I have to do, right, for the job. So like for me as a pastor, there are like things that have to do with this that I have to do, but then there are also things that we're planning, right? There's like the YMCA day, the PFLAG group that I'm part of. We're also building a support group for teenagers, so there's meetings for that type of stuff, and then meetings with other people. And then you throw in like just regular everyday family stuff, or just normal day-to-day stuff, right? There's groceries to be gotten, food to be cooked, kitchens to be cleaned, unless you're my house, and my wife won't let me touch it because she has a certain way of doing it. So then there's clothes, right? You got to wash the clothes, and then wash the clothes, and then wash more clothes, and then you got to put away the clothes. And I don't know about you guys, but I hate putting away clothes. I hate folding laundry. I'll do it because I love my wife, but there better be a TV show on, because I'm not just staring aimlessly at the wall folding laundry. I got to watch something, all right? And then there's yard work to be had, and we have these stupid vines on our fence, and I got in. Look at my arm. This is from cutting. This is the thorn pricks, and I've got them all over it, and they itch like crazy. And then I got stung. I'm wearing flip-flops because I can't wear shoes because I stamped in a stupid, what do they call, fire ant pile, and they ate my feet up. I was mowing in flip-flops. It's kind of my fault. It's Florida, right? But it's just constant, right? Just always something. And then, you feel like that idea of like, I don't have that time. And again, it's just that reminder that maybe the greatest enemy to what I want is how I'm living what I have now, right? So the past 2 weeks, last week online, we started this new series, and we called it A Better Way. And we're looking at the way of Jesus. Like when we look at the idea of Jesus, a lot of time, especially in church spaces, it's this idea of the truth of Jesus. And I do believe that Jesus brings us truth. But in today's culture, it's more like hammer truth, like truth, right? And I'm going to beat you with this truth, and I'm going to do it out of love, right? I love you. I love you so much, right? But very rarely do we ever talk about the way of Jesus. And so we're not setting aside the truth that Jesus is, but we are going to focus in on the way that Jesus loved and how he lived. And if you look at the Gospels, and the Gospels are the 4 biographical accounts, the four accounts of Jesus' life attributed to Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, you'll see something. I mean, to me, it's interesting. The idea that Jesus brought this revolution, right? He lived to roughly 33 years old, and all that we have recorded is basically like 3 years of public ministry, right? So he's got this task of bringing healing to humanity, and he only does it in 3 years. The first 30 years of his life, we have very little recorded about him, right? We've got some birth narratives. We see him once when he's like a preteen, and then nothing. And then all of a sudden, he comes out of nowhere, comes out of obscurity, and he does this public declaration by baptism that, okay, he's ready. And he says, if you will watch my life, I'm going to show you how to do this, right? And that's what baptism is. And he shows them, hey, follow the way of Jesus, and I'll show you how to do this. And then he gets this ragtag group of people, right? Unfortunately, and let's be really honest, the focus is always on the 12 disciples. But if you look in there were more than 12 people. There were lots of women involved, and a lot of times they get relegated to 12 apostles and the women. But there were many women. As a matter of fact, some of those women actually bankrolled the whole thing. So let's not look down on them too much, all right? But you've got this whole big group of people, this ragtag group of people that Jesus calls together to bring about this new idea, this new kingdom that they thought was something completely different. And he starts preaching this new way, right? He starts preaching this, not a new way. Let me reel that back in, but what was supposed to be the whole time. And he starts living a different way. He starts loving all of these people. He's enduring this hatred from the Pharisees, and he actually brought kingdom come, right? This is what the kingdom of God is supposed to look like. This is what the body of the community of God is supposed to look like, and we see that through Jesus. Now, if we look at those accounts, something that's really interesting is that Jesus was almost always busy. He was almost always doing something, but he was never rushed. We don't have any recording of Jesus like, come on people, let's go. I got places to be, right? There's stuff to do. He wasn't telling his wife and kids, come on guys, we should have left 5 minutes ago. We're going to be late. Sorry again, babe. You know, I can't help it. It was drilled into me. 5 minutes early is on time. If you're on time, you're late. If you're 5 minutes late, you might as well not show up. That's what I grew up with. But if you'll notice this, and I've got this verse for you, it's found in Mark's account. It's chapter 2, verse 14. We've got it here on the screen for you as well. Yeah. Notice there at the very beginning, you see this all over the four accounts of Jesus, and it says this, as he, and he being Jesus, walked along. As Jesus walked along. Right? Now, obviously, he didn't have a car to just jump into it, but he just went where he went. As he walked along, he saw Levi, son of Alphaeus, sitting at the tax collector's booth. Follow me, Jesus told him, and Levi got up and followed him. Right? Now, if Levi followed an unrushed Jesus, right, then just thinking through that, the idea that Levi should have been living an unrushed life. Right? If he's following an unrushed Jesus, he's living an unrushed life. And so that if we follow an unrushed Jesus, then maybe the thought could be that we can live an unrushed life as well. Not that you're not busy, but we're stepping into what he's getting ready to invite us into. So if you find yourself resonating with that, like you feel like you're constantly rushing, like I do, our anchor verse is found in Matthew. It's Matthew 11, 28 through 30. And last week I read it, last week I read it in what's called the NIV translation, but I wanted to show you a slightly different one. This is called The Message, and it's written by Eugene Peterson, and I love how he words this. Go ahead and show that Matthew 11 passage. It says, "Are you tired, worn out, burned out on religion? Come to me. Get away with me and you'll recover your life. I'll show you how to take real rest. Walk with me and work with me. Watch how I do it." I love this. "Learn the unforced rhythms of grace. I won't lay anything heavy or ill-fitting on you. Keep company with me and you'll learn to live freely and lightly." And I love that phrase, learn the unforced rhythms of grace. Doesn't that just like, Like if you just meditate on that phrase alone, to learn his unforced rhythms of grace. And unfortunately, is that the message that's being preached in most churches today? Is that what's being taught in the American church today? Culture warrior Jesus would never say that phrase. And yet, the way of Jesus leads us into learning, into leaning into that unforced rhythm of grace. Now, I mentioned earlier about Jesus coming out of obscurity, right? He's tasked with this big thing. We don't see him, and all of a sudden we do see him in that 3 years. Have you ever thought about his first miracle? His first miracle was at a wedding, right? It's the water to wine. Now, I just did a wedding a few weekends ago, and when I think wedding, and I'm sure that you do the same thing, when you think wedding, you think, 5-6 hours? And if you're behind the scenes, it's longer, but, you show up, and they do the ceremony, and hopefully the ceremony's short, right? 20 minutes tops, if you're ever looking. You don't go longer. Nobody. We've all seen them. Yours is no better. So, I'm just saying. And then you have, some pictures, and then the reception, and if there's food and dancing and all the stuff. I just did it, and the wedding started about 5 o'clock, and we ended about 10:30, so it was a lot of fun. 5.5 hours, 6 hours. Weddings here were a massive celebration. Okay, days, week. It was a massive celebration, all right? So when Jesus shows up at this wedding, he could have big-timed them, right? He could have walked in with his entourage and signed autographs, right? He's like Jesus. He could have done this, but he hung out. He stayed. And then the miracle was the fact that they ran out of wine before the party was over. And so then what did Jesus do? Right? He turned this water into not only wine, but better wine than they served at the very beginning, and was like, let's keep this thing rolling, people. And he hung out. Jesus was always busy, but he was never rushed. He didn't do that. And so if Jesus wasn't rushed, then the question that I have to ask myself is, why am I rushed? Then why are we rushed? And I'm no counselor, okay? And I don't claim to be. If you ever come to me for any kind of anything, I will tell you, I am not a counselor. I will talk through stuff with you, but then I will point you towards the professional. So I'm not a counselor. But I can look back at my life and say, why am I rushing? What's the root cause for me? And in introspection, I think that maybe some of you can resonate with this as well. But for me, it's 2 reasons. 1, I'm running from something, which then means that 2, I'm running towards something. And that constantly motivates me to rush. I'm running from failure. I'm running from being told as a 19-year-old kid in a conservative Christian school by the dean of men that I would never work in the local church, that I would never be a pastor, and that no church would ever want me. Now, at 19, that was really traumatic. And I lived in that for a long time. And when he said that to me, I was like, oh, yeah? Well, watch this, sir. And I was just like, if this is the church I have, don't want anything to do with it. And so I lived out that calling over my life that he said, right? But when I realized I can't live in that anymore, subconsciously I just had this chip on my shoulder. And so it drove me to succeed, right? At the detriment of my family and friends, I was driven to succeed. And I did. And I was really good at it. 30 under 30 lists and all that stuff and building platforms and all of that. I did that. And I was really good at it. Speaking there and speaking here and my Twitter stuff and all that jazz. But eventually, all it did was this pursuit towards what I saw as success was actively emptying who I was. Right? Because you can only give and you can only pour and you can only do so much before you start to collapse, right? Before those gears start grinding on each other. I don't know if you feel that. So for me, it was failure. It was insecurity. It was running from those traumatic experiences, that spiritual abuse that so many of us have endured. But that pushed me to something that was completely just as unhealthy. And if you had seen me during that time period, or if one of your students had been part of my student ministry, you'd have been like, this is the greatest thing ever. But on the inside, I was dying. And it was killing me. It was killing our marriage. And I finally had to quit and step away from all of that. So I don't know what it is for you. And I don't even know if that is for you. But whether you're here in person or you're on the stream, there's got to be other people that feel the same way. That you're running from something that's driving you to something that's just as unhealthy as the thing that you're running from. The problem is that I was chasing a way of life that was actively draining me and left me empty. And the greatest enemy to the life that I wanted was the way I was living the life that I had. I couldn't do the things that I couldn't live the way of Jesus because I was actively living against it. Like I was choosing that path. I was choosing that. But then I started thinking too, and I'm trying to think, like, if I'm sitting here listening to what I'm saying, I'm thinking, okay, Joe, that's great and all, but there's not enough time for the things that I need to do in my life. And maybe, but let me push back on that just a little bit. You have time for what you choose to have time for. Okay? You have time for what you choose to have time for, right? The things that are important in your life, you make time for them. For me personally, a few years ago when my health was not good, blood pressure medications and all of the stuff that came with that, and knowing that if I'm creeping into my mid-40s, if I don't do something, my kids are going to pay for this, I had to make time for me physically, to be healthy physically. I had to choose to make time, and part of that was getting up early. I had to make time for that. Now, the solution isn't more